and we're going to resume the conversation. So far, we revisited our previous conversations around mission, duties, and structure. Your chairs are going to take all of that input, consolidate and synthesize that to share back out. We just got done talking about membership, and we'll undertake a similar exercise there. Up next, we're going to talk about the operations and support of these entities. And as Chair Kane pointed out, this may be a good time to talk about how things like chairs are selected and who may be eligible for that. Our final topic will be where this is housed. We wanted to first have a conversation about, regardless and independent of where it's housed, what are some of the important elements of what these entities may need. So I'll first, as I usually do, open it up for people to lean in before I start calling on people. But again, independent of where it's housed, what are some of the critical supports or resources that may be needed? And I'll invite you to be as broad or generic or specific on these as possible. Maybe it's administrative and logistical support. Maybe you want to name that they're going to need expertise in doing research around criminal data statistics. What autonomies or elements of independence must be maintained or are needed for these entities to do their jobs regardless of where they're housed in the executive or the legislature? And finally, how should they interact with the legislature or with the executive? And you may bring in topics like reporting back. You may want to name legislative authority, or if you think one of these entities or branches should be able to direct their activities. So I'll open it up first to the conversation about supports and resources that may be needed.
Well, based on my experience, one of the things that's necessary, and it ties back to our mission is, research and data. In the fields that I worked with TCJJ, getting the data was really an important issue. As Tom knows, when we went through Senate Bill 271, we went through every misdemeanor crime, and we had data regarding average length of stay in jail for that crime. We had data that said how many times that crime was filed. For felonies, we had how many people went to prison on that crime. So we could look at what was happening. We also, because I was with the public defender's office, it was helpful, as with the DAs, to find affidavits about certain crimes and what was actually happening, what kind of people were being arrested and what were being charged with certain crimes. And that was helpful and informative. So but Linda Harrison and Stan's shop and the data people in judicial were very helpful in getting the numbers that we needed. And then obviously we could usually do the research ourselves, but having somebody that could look at other states and do research is also really helpful, because it guides the way to transformation when you find somebody else leading in an area. So again, data specialists and research specialists that can serve these groups, I think, are really important.
Madam Chair, if I could just drill down on that a little bit. Does that look like full-time research assigned to this? Is this a researcher who has a supervisor elsewhere in the state that is tasked to these things?
It's really sporadic.
Okay.
And I don't see a full-time researcher because, like, just an example, Linda Harrison does prison population projections. So when I wanted prison populations, I went to Linda Harrison. If I wanted information about parole, I went to Kevin Ford. If I wanted information about something else, I went to somebody else. It's part of their job that they're doing already in many ways. Collecting it for me was an additional task. But, you find out who the experts are, and that's who you tap. There's somebody at judicial that, that was head of diversion. So you would get the diversion numbers from Amanda, that's where you went. So some of it is just knowing where to go. And so I don't see a designated researcher at all, because you got to go to different places. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I'm torn on that. Maybe it's just because of the nomenclature.
Yeah.
Because I could see a person who has those skills, the research skills, the grab the data skills in a combined role that could potentially be close to an FTE, but you're right. That need isn't always there. So
Right.
when you're putting something in a statute and you're getting a fiscal note, maybe it's like anywhere from a 60 to 75% position that, but is responsible. And I worry because as we talk about these two groups and then subgroups and how, now if you're talking 8 subgroups looking for data and research, that time grows. So I think we got to be malleable there on the potential for an FTE, depending on how it evolves. And then I do think you need some level of admin, but in my mind, that's pretty minimal. Maybe like a quarter-time person. And that's, coordinate the meetings, set the agendas, put the materials together, get the notices out. That's kind of in my mind where I would be.
Sometimes, and again, I'll look at Stan, when Peg Flick was a researcher, we had her do a major project on bail that was not part of her job, that, had to be pulled in, and she did a fabulous job in collecting lots of data. So I'm sure that was close to full-time during those 4 months or whatever. So I don't know, I'll ask for other people's input, because sometimes it's legal, but more often than not, it's not, because we generally had the legal expertise, within the group. And we could generally get the social worker expertise, or the, the law enforcement expertise or whatever. And we never did have researchers. We never really did sitting on commission. And so, I don't know. That's just some of my thoughts about it. I'm going to ask Stan to chime in.
To Director Hilke and then to Mr. Lester, please.
I think one of the things that whatever the new entity looks like, in addition to what Maureen was just talking about with researchers, is we would serve ourselves well to have somebody that got some deep understanding of all the multidisciplinary parts of the system. Because that's a person that knows where to reach. They know to reach to judicial. They know to reach to my ORS. They know to reach, wherever and to pull that data. I will tell you, the former line that was in our budget for the CCJJ only paid for 2.5 FTE. I pretty much can guarantee you that you got double that out of CDPS, if not more, on admin support and then research support. And so, whatever we think we're going to need for support and staff and housing where it goes, I'm telling you, we're not going to think enough, because that was a heavy lift for our staff every month. And in fact, every month before every CCJJ meeting, we had a week long of task force meetings, subcommittee meetings, the big meeting, and planning for all that, and doing all the work that you two are sitting up there and doing right now, was big. And so, yeah, we need the research element, or we at least need somebody that knows how to go out and find all the different kinds of research. But then you're going to have a muscular or admin support for this as well.
Thank you, Director. Jason.
All right, so research is critical, and bringing back the unicorns from a few weeks ago, I do think that we should explore what would it look like to have empirical data that is coming from one source, and that is a full-time position that can coordinate with wherever the place is housed, wherever this is housed. I want to just bring it back that I think there should be a public and online environment, and I don't want it to be exclusive to just folks that live up here. This is a statewide effort, and we need to make that possible for everybody to be able to participate. So with that being said, if we were to entertain where it would be housed in a juvenile setting, I would think it would be housed in DHS. In a adult setting, I think it would be criminal justice. And I know that each of those entities have data people that would be able to pull the real-time stats of what's happening. And perhaps the person that, that is the researcher can coordinate with both of those entities. I think that it's critical to have a facilitator, kind of like what we have here, as well as dynamic co-chairs. But the facilitator really keeps it going. I think that if we don't happen to have a combination of both, we can find ourselves just spinning our wheels and not moving forward towards achieving goals in realistic time. And I guess the last thing I want to say is committed people that will be able to see the project through forever, how long it is. Not people that's just using this as something to get on to something else.
Other thoughts from folks about the types or specific supports? And I think it's great for the chairs to hear the general types and then to hear from Director Hilke about what that lift looks like. Rep. Weissman. Nope. Janet first. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll keep it brief just to say that I agree that admin support and research support is really critical. I think it can look a lot of different ways, and it depends how we answer other questions, but certainly funding should be made available so that we could contract out as needed if we didn't have a full-time FTE in-house to do that work. Thank you.
Thanks. I think I appreciate with Ms. Kane, or appreciate Ms. Kane's point. The barrier really hasn't been sort of legal research. I think rarely has CCJJ grappled with something where we really get stuck on that. It comes up once in a while in this place. Those haven't tended to be CCJJ bills. Rather, it's just sort of, I don't know, it's the politics of the policy, if you will. Something that I trip over on a regular basis in here is trying to get the kind of data pulls to inform policy discussions, to confirm or disconfirm some kind of hypothesis that one might be hearing. That can mean from DOC as to its population. That can mean who is in county jails and why, and what do we know about these populations, mental health, substance use, length of stay. In the jail context, things like, are you there on a sentence? Are you there pre-trial? Pulling case data from judicial, and they can get better stuff on the criminal side. I mean, I think there's been almost universal agreement. We want whatever we're doing here to be data informed. We got to be able to get the data, and it's doable, but it is necessary to build in some time to get that. It doesn't usually turn in 24 to 48 hours. And all right, we're talking about longer ramp processes here with whatever we set up, I think, at least compared to pace of the legislative session, but we shouldn't lose sight of that.
And I'm going to ask a question, and I want to be clear, this is not me offering a suggestion to all of you. It's trying to reflect what we've heard over the last couple of months. So far, I'm hearing more of the logistical and technical support, the research support. You all have also talked a fair amount about being out in communities. And I'm curious if there are any specific things that you could see these bodies needing to do that, whether that's resources or supports, or if that is an expectation of the members. And I see Professor Terranova's hand up, whether it's in response to that or not. Professor, jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that administrative support is going to be really important for the coordinating council to really coordinate and facilitate the communication and scheduling and all of the things that will go into ensuring like effective communication with the community. That seems like a heavy lift and something that would require full-time staff to be on board to do that, at least from my vantage. A note on the research, I see kind of two different purposes for researchers in our discussion. Pulling data and using data to inform reform discussions and constructing legislation. I see that as something that would be well apt for coming out of different entities that may specialize in that data or that may be familiar with that data and work with it often. The other side of research, I think that we've heard discussions of, and looking at the impact of reforms and what happens after them is more evaluation based. And I can see that being more ad hoc, not necessarily requiring a full-time researcher who would be tasked with doing that, but more identifying individuals who may be best to answer those questions, especially when you're looking at things like equity and ensuring that reforms that have been mandated are equitable and fair, safe for the community. That's, I think, a little bit different animal than the data pool and kind of getting numbers so that we know what we're working with when reforms are being constructed and made.
Janet?
Thank you. Just briefly in response to your question about community outreach, I think it would vary on the topic that's being addressed, and you might think about including a community outreach subgroup to work in support of your working groups so that you can be inclusive as it relates to the populations that are being impacted by the work. And I also just wanted to give voice to the value of having a facilitator. You here, but also in CCJJ, the meetings generally had somebody in a facilitation role. And because the work is, we're adversarial to each other often, and it can be controversial, I think it's valuable to bake that into the equation so that we can have help in reaching agreements and making concessions.
Ms. Kane?
Yeah, one of the things also, I think in the research area though, is when we started CCJJ, even before Stan's time, but Tom was there, we had a book called What Works. And we contracted with a researcher who did national research in different subject matter areas and what works to, prevent recidivism. What are the best programs? What are the elements? What does fidelity to the program look like? And it was we're 15, 20 years from that research now. There's a whole lot more research. So I do think we need to think about that in staffing. I think we have to start over again. I think it's probably the same things. What stops recidivism? Two things, marriage and jobs. It's social stability and work are the factors that most correlate to people not reoffending. So when we talk about community safe, now for kids, it's going to be different issues, obviously, which is why I think it's really important because we're not usually putting them out in jobs, it's school or structure or whatever, or family support or whatever that needs to be built up more. So I do think that's a component that we should always update and, do an update, which is what is the research telling us works? Because as we get into certain areas, we would like to know.
Rep. Weissman?
Ms. Kane, appreciate your reminding us of the What Works report that I had the occasion to read in full in the 2017 sentencing interim that we all remember. A lot of the rest of us here too, I think. We had the thought as we were going through that interim and CCJJ was pending renewal in 18, hey, is it time for a new one of those? And for mixed reasons, we didn't. Query whether in connection with doing whatever we're doing here, maybe it is time, and there would be an investment, and it's probably not less than a 6-month project. But as I think about the intersection of that report dated 08, I think by Przbilski, I think, and the 07 launch of CCJJ. All right, here's this new thing, and here is a corpus of essentially a gigantic, very in-depth lit review, to inform the work. Kind of made sense to me, although I was not here at the time. I know that you were. I think it might make sense again. So that doesn't directly speak to any of these other things, but it might be a helpful adjunct.
So I'm going to bring in the next question. This one is still on the table if additional things come to mind. But the next question is around what autonomies or aspects and elements of independence are needed. And I'll remind right now, we're talking regardless of where this is housed. And is that things as connected to what we were just talking about, like selecting who to do research for the committees? Is it the ability to set their own agendas? What oversight is reasonable? What becomes unreasonable? Again, regardless of where this is positioned, should there be absolute autonomy to explore whatever topics the coordinating councils or the bodies determine to publish whatever recommendations? Should they have absolute independence in their operations and their work?
Yeah, this is a hard one. I mean, just my opinion, there needs to be the ability for the legislative and the executive to have inputting and potential guidance on what's important to them, but I don't think they should have any control over this entity at all. I think this entity, once constructed, and if with the agreement of legislative and executive constructed, should then be on its own to come up with policies, rules, regulations, priorities. Some more autonomy in where it goes, how it goes, so that no single foot can come down and say, I don't want you in that space.
Anybody want to offer a differing thought or layer on to Chair Raines? Maureen?
No, I think from the testimony and also I would agree there has to be independence. Of course, you know, the legislature doesn't have to pass the bill and the governor doesn't have to sign the bill. But, you know, this group, if it is wedded to its mission, will not be dictated by the political agenda of one or the other parties.
I agree that this is a tricky question to answer because in my somewhat limited experience with CCJJ, it was very frustrating when that group spent a lot of time and resources on an issue and then moved it forward for policy recommendations and it fell flat because it didn't have the support of the General Assembly and or the governor. And so I think there was a moment in time when CCJJ looked for more direction from the governor's office and from lawmakers about how to align the work with priorities. And as we all recognize, pendulum's always swinging, and I think we swung well past that useful point into feeling more like a pawn in a political agenda where our work was dictated to us, and I don't think anybody wants that. So I agree, Maureen, you're trying to hit the sweet spot, and I just wanted to give voice to some of the historical challenges that this group, that CCJJ had.
Appreciate that, Jenna. And I think, you know, it's always tricky when we talk about putting numbers into legislation and statutory requirements. I would ask the group your thoughts on, Tom, to your point about that balance that the governor or the legislature can offer suggestions. We talked a little bit earlier about duties. Do you want to find that sweet spot there that one of the duties is to consider or to include up to X, you know, amount of input from? Do you want to name what that dynamic is that you'll do the work but not the bidding, but it can't dictate your overall agenda? What should that look like if a governor or the Judiciary Committee says, we want you to investigate or explore this one topic versus if they say these 27 things that would overwhelm the bodies?
To Janet's point, that's a little bit where we got in trouble every now and then. I mean, I envision it's kind of to the next issue, perhaps legislative, you know, maybe the legislators, minority party, majority party are the ones who choose the co-chairs to these groups. And to that extent, have some influence with the co-chairs. The executive, I don't think you're ever going to ignore the executive office. I don't know how you balance that with if you were to get an unreasonable executive, not that that would ever happen in the next, anyway. And the group as a whole says no. I think the group's still got to have the ability to do that.
So let's go ahead and combine these questions because I think you're right. They are inseparable. And that's, you know, the autonomies and elements what should be the relationship and the type of interaction between these entities, whether it's the entities or the coordinating council, and the legislature and the governor's office?
Let me go back one step maybe,
Yeah.
because, and this is just how I envision things. I envision a body that works as collaboratively and as open-minded as they can, based on evidence-driven data, research, to come up with, in essence, we, with our SMEs under us who have trickled this up, believe this to be a best case policy, best practices. Whether or not you, legislature, choose to run it is your prerogative. Whether or not you, governor, decide to endorse it is your prerogative. But we as a collaborative body that have really put in the time and effort, think we can support and defend our argument that this is the best way to go.
So just for clarity, and while I've got the two of you and I've got Mr. Weissman here, should the body be free to publish a report and hope that the governor or the legislature do something with it? Should the legislature be bound to hold a hearing on recommendations, whether annual or on some other basis, to ensure that those recommendations reach some audience?
In fairness to the legislature, I don't think we should be able to bind them in any way as to how they choose to. I think the group should have to report to both, to the legislature and the executive. And then what they choose to do with it, see if they get reelected.
Mr. Weissman, if you pass a bill creating these entities, should you be obligated to hear from them?
Appreciate the question. There ought to be a written report. There's no point, I won't say there's no point. The work of whatever happens should be memorialized in writing. We have this whole system for the statutory reports database. So it can be there for legislators, the executive, and the public. The public should be able to see all this stuff too. I think the mechanism of, bringing it before some committees, and I guess depending on what the writing is, I mean, judiciary is the one that obviously comes to mind, but hey, the health committees, or again, depending on what was delved into, I mean, you could imagine the local government committees that embrace housing. You could imagine the education committees. Commonly we write into statute somewhere that DVOMB, SOMB, DA salary, all have to come before judiciary. As the guy who said to calendar all this in the last month, I'm becoming a little bit sensitive to how many things we toss on the joint judiciary calendar because there's only so many days in legislative session. But I think the mechanism of, if you will, hardwiring a touch point is worth considering. There ought to be some flexibility in the when, just so we don't have something that ends up on a shelf. Now, this will come with research, imprimatur. But yeah, then legislators and the chief executive have to agree through bicameralism and presentment that it should become the law. I'll stop there for now.
I don't want the people working in these groups to say, oh, we're going to issue a report and we'll see if anything happens with it. That is not a recipe for engagement. So I think that the group has to believe that what they're doing is going to see the light of day and is going to be out there. And that's why when we talked about having bills before, having, bill titles or allocating or be allowed to have titles or whatever plays into this for me. And I'm not sure I have the answer right now. It is something, I'm interested in knowing Rep. Weissman's thought, because I think it's different when you talk, you could say the support is from the Department of Human Services and their data, or from Department of Public Safety and the research and the staff as contract or whatever. But it is an independent commission that is co-chaired and that is allocated through its legislative members X amount of bills, right? I mean, it could be something like that. I don't know, but I do want the independence. And I want the data and research capacity to support it. But there's a lot of reports that are written that never go forward. And that would be really sad.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think Maureen makes a great point. I don't want to, I get it. I don't want to
Yeah,
just
I
be
don't
able to
know.
say, hey, we did great work and you're not listening. Oh, well. No, there needs to be a way for the ideas to move forward
Yeah.
somehow.
And that's where we hit on Rep. Weissman because he's the big brain on these
Yeah.
issues of how we can integrate that and make that happen, or if Rep. Soper's on, because I don't know if he made it back on, of how we could bring this forward, or whether we could get on, on the executive branch's agenda, I mean, bring us something forward and have the executive branch converse with this group in creating their criminal justice or public safety or whatever agenda they want to say, or their behavioral health agenda. Because right now, I think sometimes where the executive goes is not necessarily where the community goes. And we might be able to bridge that gap through this particular group. So anyway.
A couple more things on this. So members of the executive branch here may not love the following point, but it is the perspective of the legislative branch that we can provide certain direction to the executive, within constitutional guardrails. So we're just sort of imagining at a high level here. Representatives from, we'll just pick on Director Hilke, the Department of Safety, shall annually visit with the, whatever we're going to call it, to discuss their findings. You could have some not overly prescriptive, nonetheless mandate or direction provided by the policymaking body to the executive branch to create that touch point, as we would also have some kind of legislative touch point. Now, to the point about titles, there was the specific, it wasn't a long discussion, but Mr. Raines will remember this. In 2018, when the sunset process was going on for CCJJ, there was the discussion, hey, should CCJJ explicitly get some number of bills? It was never going to be many. I mean, 5 is pretty standard. There was some fairly strong reaction against that. I don't think I could recall and try to characterize why. Maybe because with some exceptions, CCJJ had a pretty good track record of turning ideas into bills. Now, it had to be through either getting a member to commit one of their own titles or going to leadership and making the case, but I think the case was often made. There was one notable exception that I remember dealing with, extraordinary risk sentencing, that got left on the shelf from back in 2013. That was kind of a bummer, but whatever. Now, just in terms of constitutional architecture and where the legislative power is vested, there is going to have to be some sufficient legislator and legislature tieback if we want to vest bill authority. In the first instance, to pass muster under Article 5. In the second instance, to pass muster with all of our colleagues in the 2 main chambers. It's not a small thing to vest additional bills outside of the usual rules. We do it with interim committees all the time. I have in the past invoked examples of sales and use tax, legislative oversight of tax policy, BHDCJS, legislative interim committees with a supportive subject matter expert task force. That's not precisely the structure we're talking about here, but it is perhaps analogous. We can't constitutionally let the supportive task force write a bill. It's not how the government is set up. We can get together a group of legislators and have one or more groups of experts, frankly, doing the bulk of the work to inform the legislators, who then exercise the offices to which they've been elected and are sort of the final stamp, and vote in a public hearing in a room like this one to say, yes, good people in LLS, please draft that pursuant to what all we've seen. So there's a couple of different ways to go at that, but I hear your point, Ms. Kane, that we want to possibly do better than invite some thinking and then have it go in a nice report and not go anywhere. But there are certain further processes that we're going to have to see to go from there to legislation. And that's basically because that's just how constitutional government requires it.
And I think that's what we heard from the testimony about smaller groups with time limited. And they wanted that work to be done efficiently to move forward into some enacted policy. So I think we have to think about how that happens. And I do think independence is more important than bill titles. If we have to weigh, that keeping it independent, that we can't, all the stuff we already talked about, but I'm not, this is a good discussion, and anybody else who has ideas, because it's going to be a tough one. And it's one that we need to navigate, I think, in our recommendation.
Yeah,
Don't
let me see if I can
really do it.
invite folks in on what, and we've had the good fortune to work with probably 50 or 60 task forces, and you've got the two different directions of activity that I think we need to figure out what that balance point is. One is who's directing them and how. Does the legislature, and I think we've ruled out the legislature or the governor being able to dictate to them their agenda. Is there a middle ground where either or could request, or for example, Mr. Weiss or Mr. Weissman's friends could say, we want a subcommittee on this, and we're providing you the resources for it. You may continue your agenda, similar from the governor. So with the information flowing down to what they should do, and with the work that this committee does, there is, what I have referred to as the publish and praise strategy of they write reports and see who may look at it, up to they have legislative authority. And is there some mix or middle of those? So Ubaldo, I see your hand up and would love everybody's thoughts if you want to offer them on both how decisions are made about what to examine and how those examinations are received. Ubaldo, to you.
I just want to say that I feel like if we really want to be transformative, then the work that we do has to have some real grit and teeth. I heard the word bind in there, and I think Rhett Weissman said something about not burdening the legislator with that. But could I get some more clarification on exactly how that works? Because I feel like being able to bind and really get a vote is where we want to go. And maybe that question is directed at Weissman.
Yeah, sorry,
I'll take
Mr.
it.
Chavez, I want to make sure I'm tracking the question so I answer right. Could I ask you to restate?
Of course. So I feel like the work that the entity will be doing is very important, especially when we think about being transformative and having a real impact in a positive direction. I feel like being able to bind is the word I heard. I'm not too keen on how the legislative process works, and that's why I'm directing this question towards you all, and especially Brett Weissman. Is like, you said something about not being a burden on the legislature. I mean, does that really cause a burden, or is this something that we can do to make sure that we enact power, make sure that this entity or entities has that power to make those transformations?
I guess I'll run at that the best I can. So there's a few models that I have differing degrees of experience with. The model that I think I'm most closely connected to is this interim committee on tax policy that I chaired last year. Only 6 members, but we also had, and this is set up in the statute that created us, a supportive task force of experts, people from private, tax advice practice, from the government, maybe from nonprofit, who would take a pretty bare bones amount of direction from the committee and then go off and apply their experience and their substantive knowledge and maybe more research and kind of bring a report back to us, and that can inform future legislation. Other processes, I think Mr. Abramson is familiar with from a couple of summers ago, when the state got almost $4 billion of ARPA relief money from the federal government. There was a pretty robust process around here to try to decide how to spend that in the most intelligent way. Legislation created some work groups. I think they were called work groups over the summer. And those convened pretty broad groups of folks. They were facilitated. I don't think they had bill drafting authority per se, but the legislative leadership additional bill process was invoked to generate many dozens of bills pursuant to the policy decisions made by those groups that I think were done almost entirely by consensus at the end. Some other models are that we have, there's kind of a standing interim committee on how to treat persons with behavioral health disorders in the criminal legal system. Again, constellation of legislator members and an expert task force. And I have never served on that, but my observation is that the legislators lean hard on the task force because there are some people with some real depth there. They help frame up the bills. They then, in the regular session that follows the interim, they come to committee and testify. They're often the most knowledgeable witnesses in the room on those bills. It just requires the final approval of legislation by the legislators as opposed to task force members. So a number of different models, maybe any of which could potentially inform how we go forward. I hope that helps respond to the question.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that this entity, whether that's bill writing authority or however that looks or however that's spelled out, has the power to make sure that these transformative changes get enacted. We want to make sure that this in my mind, that this group has enough power to make sure that stuff really gets done. And I think Maureen kind of touched on that as well.
I think that last piece is probably not something that can be guaranteed. I think what Rep. Weissman has thrown out as examples are potentially the extent of what we could hope to achieve, which is bill writing authority. After that, it's always the purview of the legislature, and we can in no way bind them. Trust me, I wish I could sometimes also, or unbind them.
And I will share, and I think Rep. Weissman may be able to add color. There are few, if any, task forces, work groups, et cetera, that actually have bill writing authority. It's a small subset of entities created by the legislature. Is that correct?
I think it depends. The ARPA ones did not have bill writing authority, but there was certainly the expectation that they would, the ideas would generate legislation, and they did dozens and dozens of bills. If there is a letter interim committee or a statutory interim committee, there is bill authority. Again, limited in number. I mean, 2 or 3 or 5. So hard choices always have to be made about what goes forward.
On that note, I'm going to bring us to the final piece of this topic. And I think we've started hearing some different pieces of it. And this really gets to the heart of where should these entities exist? And rather than asking for a roll call vote on should it be at CDPS, should it be in the governor's office, should it be in the legislature, I want to talk instead about what are the opportunities or the challenges in each event. So the first question is, if we were to locate these entities within the executive, which may be directly at the governor's office or within a department, and I'll invite people to weigh in on either, what would be the advantages in terms of resources, supports, or institutional access and knowledge? What would challenges might it present, as you were talking earlier? So we'll go there first. Second, we'll talk about the same for the legislature.
I think that an advantage, having worked at Colorado Department of Human Services, is if it was housed in the governor's office. Whenever the governor says hello, everybody immediately says, yes, yes, what do you need? So I think that, people would possibly be able to get work done if it was supervised by the governor's office as opposed to any respective department.
I think our challenge, just how this evolved over the years is, you know, we need to focus on functionality, resources, and where and who can get the work done for us. But our challenge is perception and misconception and reality sometimes. And I think for better or for worse, through nobody's fault, perceptions evolved that, hey, if it's housed here, that means this person or this group has inside, you know, traction or can do X, Y, and Z because it's housed there. So to me, kind of why we started with the structure first was if we're clear about the autonomy, it shouldn't really matter where it's housed if those lines are clear. And when you get to functionality, places like DCJ, or I presume maybe even DHS, or are viable in terms of being able to hold the meetings, host the meetings. So we got to focus on functionality.
And I just want to name that I think we heard some of that when Janet and Director Hilke were talking about the types of staff and supports needed. Other thoughts, again, thinking specifically about it being located within the executive and the executive including any of the cabinet departments.
So I heard a lot of discussion and Rep. Weissman and Senator Gonzalez, and a lot of people talked about it. And I went through the chart of where people thought it should be. And there were a lot of people that wanted it in the legislative branch for a lot of good reasons. And my only concern about that was there isn't necessarily within the legislative branch the ability to get some of the data and research. And I'm not sure where that staff would fit, because we have a ledge counsel that does legal research. And, you know, we have other staff, but they're really geared towards legislative stuff. And a lot of times what we need here is a little different, you know, in terms of contractability to write a new what works book, you know, or whatever. And so and maybe that's just my narrow brain seeing it that way. So, I mean, I'd like some ideas about that.
You know, we're to some of the toughest questions here because these are frankly some of the most political ones. Look, I think that we have to separate where are there resources that are going to be helpful, which is, I think that's just sort of a question of acknowledging who has brains and time to help. And then where is it going to be housed, which is, in my observation, a lot more loaded. Yeah, there are people at DCJ. Director Hilke, what are we going to rename DCJ to this year? Office of Community Programs, and it's going to take me years to get DCJ out of my head, but okay. I'm going to call it DCJ for now because the bill ain't signed. Are there people with expertise at DCJ? Yeah. DHS, sure. Others. Yes, there are also people with expertise in the legislature. To the extent that we need legal research, that's LLS. LCS is much broader. They do sort of the fact research, the legislative history, multi-state comparisons. If it's a matter of not reinventing the wheel by running down the good secondary sources from the likes of NCSL, CSG, whoever else in the space, they are often the ones who do that. They staff all of the interim committees that are legislative interim committees, and to a little bit of a lesser extent, they support the task forces that are attached to the interim committees where there is such a thing. And you know, there aren't all the time, but Tax One is an example. So as I thought about this question going back months, again, it is within the power of the legislature to place some requests or obligations, even if you will, on the executive. Right? DCJ is directed to provide help to a certain name of entity we create in the following ways. Now, they will do the fiscal note process. We, the legislature, have to provide enough staff and money, of course. But that could be the case even if the entity were legislatively housed, even if it were in the nature of a legislative interim committee. Again, putting that judgment aside for the moment, I'll have to rattle my brain to see what a more independent, fully independent of structurally of either branch type of entity would look like. I mean, we have executive, legislative, and judicial, and I don't think anybody thinks putting this thing in the judicial branch is a good idea. See, you know, conflict thing. That's not what they're here for. Which brings us to the other too, and I'll noodle on that some more.
Director Hilke, I am going to put you on the spot here since you've walked this path. When you think about, we already had the conversation about the types of supports and resources. So in a world where those are assured, what do you see as the advantages to placing it either in the legislature or within a cabinet level agency or department or within the executive? Or concerns about it being located in any of the above?
I think I'm indifferent to where it's located, really. But I guess it was in a cabinet executive branch agency, and still needed the support. It's going to need the support, whether it's in the legislative branch as well. And I think I failed to mention it at the time, but that also assumes a good facilitator, you know, in addition to the staff that works there as well. So, you know, regardless of where it lands, that staff, that support, that horsepower behind the work that needs to be done is going to have to be done, you know, built around it. I guess I can't imagine a successful placement without making sure that we have that support.
And this is why we took the conversation in the sequence that we did, to first talk structural issues, to then talk independence and autonomies and the role of it. I guess the question I'm going to ask, and I'm going to ask you to set aside the political optics, and I know that is not a small thing, particularly on an issue like this and what got us sitting here where we are. Are there folks who, if we have the independencies and the autonomies we talked about earlier and the supports and resources, feel very strongly about it being either in the legislature or in the executive?
So I just have this question because I don't really know that I have the answer here, but I want it to be in a place, I want the staff that works it not to feel like the job they're doing is a stepchild of their real job. You know, I want them to feel like the job they're doing is in a good extension of their job. So my experience with the legislative group is they're really good at the legal research and all that stuff. If they have to start talking to judicial about getting data and doing all this, or, you know, I just, like, that's not, you know, we had all this excitement many years ago about doing a post-enactment review of bills, because Ledge Council we'd put that thing in there, say, oh, this would be a follow-up. There's in Title II, there's language that a certain amount of time after a bill passes, Ledge Council does a post-enactment review, which is they look and see what the outcome is of the bill that they passed. And those post-enactment reviews have never been as robust as I dreamed they would be, because it wasn't really the home that was being done in and the bills that we put it on, they didn't really have that sense of ownership too. So those are my concerns. But if we, you know, we can have a multifaceted team supporting this independent agency. You know, I mean, we can, you know, build that unicorn, I think, maybe.
And let me just ask, and Mr. Weissman, you may want to weigh in on this as well as what's on your mind. You bring to the table the point of it being independent and what is the expectation on wherever it's housed. It seems to me you all need to be clear on what is the expectation of wherever you're housed on advancing the work of these bodies. If you publish recommendations, is there an expectation or is there an explicit understanding that there is no expectation that may fall in that department's policy agenda, or that Ledge Council may do any extra work for you? And does this body need any advocacy potential or power? Janet.
Just briefly, I think you know, when you posed the question originally, you were quick to sort of wave off the political element. And to me, that is actually,
It's the biggest.
it's the core of the question. And I think if it's in the legislative branch, you can structure things so that there's bipartisan involvement and control. And if it's housed in the executive branch, it's subject to whomever's the governor at the time and that party. And to me, those are important things. I think with regard to the question you just posed, you can build the support around this team, no matter which branch it's in. And I don't really have strong feelings about that, but I have heard through the testimony and through my experience, I think it is important that this is a nonpartisan or at least bipartisan body.
And
And
to
forgive
be-
me, I have to step out for a court hearing, but I'll be as short as I can. Thanks.
Thank you. And to be clear, me trying to set aside the political optics was in no way a dismissal of how tantamount they are to anything. It was an attempt to get us focused on the resources and the specifics, and can we find a way to insulate and mitigate as best we can against them?
I think we can do that structure. I don't think we can escape a certain percentage of folks who are going to say wherever it's housed, because there is that nexus that that entity has undue influence. It's unavoidable, but we can do our best to guard against it in the structure.
Thanks. I'm thinking of how, let me back up. I've had a preference as between the two for a long time. Shocking, right? That we have to pick one of these two, that we house something legislatively. Hey, I'm a legislator, film at 11. But drilling deeper, what does that look like? I appreciate Ms. Kane's point that we don't want supporting this work to be kind of like the last 10% of things on somebody's list. And it doesn't have to be. A couple years ago, the legislature passed a bill to sort of enhance the legislative process to the extent of having what's called a greenhouse gas note, which is what it sounds like for certain bills. To effectuate that, we hired, a professional with a degree and a deep history in that to really go to town on that work. And she did other things, but that was a lot of it. Another example, years ago, we had to update our workplace harassment policy and practices and everything, and some folks know what I'm talking about. We created a whole new office called the Office of Legislative Workplace Relations. Happens to be within LLS, but the director of that office has a direct report to the director of LLS as otherwise separate. Created a new office with a new mission for a purpose, and the work that office does is, it's their work. It's the top of their list. It is not at the bottom of somebody else's list. We hired an HR professional to just do that. And the scope of that has now gotten to where that person has an assistant as well. So you could imagine, I'm just going to make up some vanilla names, the Office of Criminal Justice Policy would be housed, probably LCS makes more sense than LLS here. You'd probably hire a staff director. That person would have some quarterbacking role. Other folks, fiscal note, research, et cetera, already at LCS could also support. LLS could also support as needed. DCJ, DHS, whatever, we could scope all of that out. But you create a new structure to call out that this is a new thing and it is to be taken seriously. And resources would be provided through the LCS budget. You'd have space and computers and all the stuff you have to have. And again, that doesn't exclude the role of subject matter input from the executive, but it's a way to create a home legislatively, I think, without getting lost, and by analogy to things this place has figured out in recent memory.
Reactions, questions, additional thoughts on advantages, concerns, or challenges about different places for it to be based? With the big recognition that as the chair pointed out, somebody's going to have a problem with wherever it is. And the key will be for this body's integrity to rise above that, I think, and their work.
Yeah, I think we all have to think about this for a little, knowing we're under a time frame, but maybe we come up with, Tom and I can come up with, kind of a legislative or an independent that's supported one way or another. I always said at the end of the day, what people are gonna do is count the votes that they have in the voting group, right? How many votes do I get and what's the majority? Am I in the majority? Is my view in the majority? So I do think this is important, but it's whether or not who's sitting and who the membership are, if their vote may or may not be controlled by their party, if they're a legislator, their governor, if they're an executive member or whatever. So I'm just gonna be totally honest, that may be the end of the day, when we look at this. So that's why we do have to look at it as a package. I think we have to design the membership and make sure it has a community, systems balance, and maybe the votes, everybody's gonna feel okay about that. That's where we want to be.
We do have a question online. Ms. Hunter Holen. I think she's waving me. I hope she is staying safe.
Is she in the car?
Yeah.
Looks like it.
She's on mute.
She's trying to get off mute. Debbie, I will keep an eye for your mic to be off mute and we'll get right back to you. We are a little ahead of schedule, which is always a nice thing to be able to share with everybody. I won't drag us out unnecessarily. I do want to give any member of the working group the opportunity to offer any closing thoughts, whether it's on the most recent topics of where to house, the supports it needs, the resources, or your closing thoughts on our earlier. There we go. Ms. Hunter Holen, you are off mute and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I was just wondering, and this is just an idea, that wherever it is housed, it's not as important as the ability to have like briefings with those branches so that you can get buy-in from both sides and better facilitate the bills that you have that you need to pass. Does that make sense?
You're
Yeah,
seeing some
I
nodding
think
heads.
that's a really important point, and I'm thinking about that as we're trying to, find the sweet spot here.
I
Okay.
won't do a roll call, but I will open it to the floor if anybody would like to offer any final comments. I think with all of this, where we are is your chairs have some work sessions to do, and we're happy to support however we can, consolidating and synthesizing all of this to come back to you with ideas that revise the mission, as you've said, get actionable on the duties, reflect the membership composition. We may need to solicit more input and offer some proposals to all of you on how this is structured to provide the independence, the opportunity to influence executive and legislative action, and how they interact with the legislature and the executive. Does any member have any final comments they'd like to offer? Mr. Chavez, please.
Thank you. I feel like independence and autonomy is very important. I think we need to think about that. But I see the advantage of being housed under some of these branches as well. For instance, the executive branch, being close to executive leadership there has its advantage. Of course, being under legislative branch, you might be able to have more effective advocacy for policy changes. I also like the idea of being under the Department of Public Safety, because I think it kind of aligns with some of the vision of having the entity focused on public safety. But I feel like this this entity that we're going to create will have some of these players and actors involved. And maybe we can still tap into those resources with folks from those said branches being involved either on some of the task forces, subcommittees. And then we can still have an independent agency that is fully autonomous. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Ubaldo. Any other members of the working group? With that, that will conclude the formal agenda business. We will now move on to public comment, followed by some closing remarks. We have one member of the public who has asked to speak. Kristen Hartman, if you are with us, I would invite you to come on camera if you would like, and you have 3 minutes to address the TCJJ working group.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you clearly. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for allowing me to speak again. Because you were working on structure this week, I thought this was really interesting. When Maureen Kane talked about how well, all of you actually spoke about people putting in all this time and effort into a folder, and how you didn't want the staff people to be like stepchildren, but to be fully on board. And I found that a little bit ironic, because that is exactly how we affect, I can't speak for everybody, how a lot of us affected citizens feel. We put in all this work, we have all this experience, and it ends up in a folder or in a spam, or we get 3 minutes. That's why I'm really, thank you for giving me another chance this week to hone it down a little bit. And so I just thought it was ironic that if they're stepchildren, you want to be in folder, we affected citizens kind of are feeling like orphans if you want to keep into that dynamic. And so when I saw you guys talking about structure, I was really excited, because I put together, which I'll drop in the chat when I'm done, 1 page front and back citizen policy memo on inputs into all those things you guys have talked about, structure. And so what I've come up with, oh, sorry, I'm a grad student in the Masters of Public Policy program at CU, and I'm also the parent of a service-related disabled veteran left homeless after a SWAT raid while trying to get away from her abuser, and she was on wait list for treatment. So I've kind of got a double perspective there, and I'm trying to stay academic. And one of the things that I've noticed throughout, I spent my whole semester working on the CCJJ for my term paper and a policy memo, which I sent to my rep, Matt Soper, on December 8th. And he responded back saying he was on the CCJJ and that he would read it and get back with me, acknowledging my interest. When January 5th came and went, and there was a big public comment opportunity, I was really disappointed because I didn't know about it. And I kind of felt like I wasn't sure what else I needed to do. I've written a term paper, I've spent a month, put all this time. I've reached out to my rep who's on the commission, and I still was not invited or made aware of this public opportunity. And in November, my daughter who was promised treatment, was denied treatment the week before Thanksgiving here in Mesa County because the doctor was out sick and they had no backup. So my daughter, after 3 days of withdrawals, waiting, it was just a real rough time for us. So my whole point is that we affected citizens feel this, whether it's to work on these issues and present them, and to have them end up in a folder or spam mail. We feel heard so many of you talk about that. I thought, maybe you guys would be open to policyworkgroups.com, which is a concept project that I have come up with that came out of my
Ms. Hartman, we are just
paper I
past
did
time. I
on
can give you
CCJ.
about another 60 seconds to wrap up if you would, please.
That is very kind of you. I really appreciate it. And so I'm going to drop in the chat 2 policy memos that I've done in the last 4 days. One I did on SB 24020, with the alcohol takeout and delivery, which I found weird on the heels of alcohol deaths rising 60%. And so I proposed that the permit fees be raised to help pay for addiction. So there's little things like that where I feel that we citizens do all this work and would also like the opportunity to, and then the last thing I wanted to throw in is, why are we not using all these academic think tank resources and public policy in our universities for helping you guys support the research and all this stuff? There are so many brilliant students I'm in school with. Anyways, thank you so much for your time. And if it's okay if I drop these, is it okay if I drop these?
You
two
you
little
can do that,
citizen
Ms. Hart, and I will actually tell you, if you would email those to tcjj@confluencepsg.com. We are the facilitators for this group and would be happy to make sure that all the members receive that. And I can assure you, it will not be in a spam folder. It will be in our inbox and we will distribute it to the members.
That would be terrific. And would you mind putting that email address in the chat? Because I did not quite catch all of it. I apologize.
No, my
And
colleague
thank you
just dropped it in, should find it there.
Thank you so
Ms.
much.
Hartman,
I'll
yeah.
send it right now.
Thank you very much for joining us again, and we appreciate
you.
the work that you're doing and your interest in this. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our chairs. I think the clear next steps that I see are you all have some time to spend the chairs synthesizing it and sharing back out. We are probably going to be starting drafting mode here over the next 2 to 3 weeks. So I think we'll move forward on that. But Tom and Maureen, closing thoughts and any asks of the members before we all debrief after this.
My only ask would be if, as you've pondered some of the things we talked about today, if you come up with any new ideas or thoughts or words that you think would be helpful, to just send an email to Tom and I as we plan to structure some things for you to consider at our next meeting on the 15th.
Yeah, I agree with that. That'd be incredibly helpful in all of the great discussion today. I mean, I always come in here thinking I have an idea and I leave realizing I have none. So I'll start again tonight.
All right, with that, at 4:40, we are concluding today's session and we will follow up with everybody by email.